During the 1960s, Johnny Carson had rivals. This is where the late night wars really start heating up. Because before Johnny Carson, late night television had become a new topic. It had arisen, and I believe in 1952 or 1953. I know it was in the early 1950s when it arose with Steve Allen. Television had been popping up more. It had become increasingly popular, especially by the end of the 1930s, late 1920s, and the 1940s, rolling out the stairs, rolling out the red carpet for television in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and decades after, with it becoming increasingly more popular. With television on the rise since the early 50s, Johnny Carson became the host in 1962 of The Tonight Show, and he gained a massive audience after he came in. But he did face rivals with Joey Bishop and Marv Griffin. Joey Bishop was a member of the Rat Pack, and he was a frequent guest host on The Tonight Show before launching his own competing program, The Joey Bishop Show, on ABC in 1967. Though he was a popular substitute host for Carson, Bishop's show would ultimately fail to gain significant ratings and was canceled in 1969. Regis Philbin served as his sidekick and announcer. Merv Griffin was a singer and entertainer who started as talk show host in 1962, the year Johnny Carson began hosting The Tonight Show, and he presented more in-depth interviews focused and a interview-focused show. His show aired on NBC, CBS, and in syndication throughout the 1960s and 1970s. While Griffin was well received by audiences, he never matched Carson's late-night ratings dominance. Other rivaling hosts were Mike Douglas for hosting the daytime talk show host, The Mike Douglas Show, during the 60s. Jackie Leonard Oh, wait, no. We already talked about him in the last video. I believe Dick Cavett was a very big late-night television host. Not as big as Johnny Carson, but was very popular. The Dick Cavett Show launched in 1968. He became a more significant competitor to Carson in the 1970s. So if you've watched Forrest Gump, and you watch that scene where there's Forrest Gump and John Lennon, the guy interviewing them, he's Dick Cavett. As we move into the 1970s, I've already stated that Dick Cavett and Merv Griffin were both big competitors of The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, the Johnny Carson Tonight Show. But NBC started to think about doing different things. Start moving over to do stuff. They had this variety show where it was, I don't know exactly how to describe it. I feel like I should say that it was like the Ed Sullivan Show, but it was really something between Saturday Night Live and the Ed Sullivan Show. That's how I feel. So they try to experiment with this guy named Tom Snyder, with his own show called Tomorrow with Tom Snyder. This aired after The Tonight Show from 1973 to 1981. Tom Snyder's program was a late night show with a distinctly different, more serious format. He was more intense than Johnny Carson on the one-on-one interviews. And he often spoke about smoking and talking directly to the off-camera crew. But ultimately, his show got canceled. Not because he died. He did that in 2007, and we miss him for that. His show got canceled when Carson gained control over the 12:30 a.m. time slot and gave it to a young comedian named David Letterman. So it seems that even though Tom Snyder was on NBC, Johnny Carson saw him as a rival, and he saw Tom Snyder as a threat to the Johnny Carson show, the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. There are two here that I didn't mention earlier. The Phil Donahue Show, a pioneer of the audience participation format. He was synced program was a powerhouse in the daytime market. He engaged in personal and political discussions with a largely female audience, a novelty at the time. He must have been a ladies' man. And then Joan Rivers. Rivers was a successful comedian, a frequent guest host for the Carson, particularly during the 1970s and 1980s. Her relationship with Carson sourced when she tried to compete directly with him by getting her own late night show. As the late night wars continues, the war didn't really begin until 1962 when Johnny Carson came in, and it's not necessarily because of Johnny Carson, it's because the genre had been discovered, it had been created. I want to talk about my earlier remark about Johnny Carson and Tom Snyder's relationship. I said that they were rivals, and Johnny Carson felt threatened by um, Tom Snyder. There's no evidence towards that claim, and I'm sorry that I made that claim. But that's how I personally feel. Replacing someone on your own network, seizing that time slot and replacing it with another comedian seems like he didn't like that guy. More as him not necessarily wanting more time, but it seemed to me that he didn't want Tom Snyder on the air. So to me, he seemed as a to me, it seems that Tom Snyder and Johnny Carson were rivals. And it seems to me, nothing, that Johnny Carson saw Tom Snyder as a threat. That's just my personal belief by what I've read. But there's no credible evidence that Johnny Carson actually felt threatened. So, conspiracy theory. David Letterman. He was known for his offbeat and ironic humor. He hosted the Late Night with David Letterman on NBC immediately following The Tonight Show from 1982 to 1993. His unique style built a loyal following, establishing him as a Johnny Carson late-night competitor. Carson, who personally favored Letterman, was disappointed when NBC chose Jay Leno over Letterman to replace him in 1992. Spoiler alert! How dare you tell me that? I obviously know this. The reason why I'm doing these videos is because I feel like there's not really any videos on YouTube that are actually good. Actually, there are. There's one series I find really good, but is way too long. And this is supposed to be a shorter alternative. Arsenio Hall. I just butchered that. Arsenio Hall show, which began in 1989, began a runaway synced success that appealed to a younger, more urban audience. Its popularity even had NBC executives pressuring Carson to step down to make way for a host who could attract similar, hipper demographics. Hall's show was known for its party known for its party atmosphere, diverse guests, and audience chants of woof, woof, woof. Pat Sajak. He's best known as the host of the Wheel of Fortune, so that's where I knows. I feel like that's like a hockey last name. Anyway, Pat was CBS's version of The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. The Pat Sajak show launched in 1989, but was a rating disappointment. It was canceled after just over a year. Unable to compete with Carson and the rising popularity of Arsenio Hall. So it seems, so at this point, that Arsenio Hall is starting to become a main competitor to Johnny Carson. He's becoming the man who might beat Johnny Carson. David Letterman is also a threat to, well, Johnny Carson liked David Letterman, and he would for the rest of his life. So he didn't see him as a threat, but David Letterman was a rival. Like how the Beatles and the Rolling Stones were rivals. They weren't competing with each other, but they were rivals in that sense. And Tom Snyder, which I think is a dumb idea, hosted a late night talk show host and brought a woman around, and hosted Tomorrow Coast to Coast.